He whispered, "Trust me," on their wedding night, and her world fell silent around his heart. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and it is the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories of love, courage, and redemption. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and thank you so much for being here. Now, let us return to our main character. The summer air along the coast of Maine carried the scent of salt and lavender. The waves moved slowly against the rocks, glowing amber under the setting sunday. Inside the Seaview estate, chandeliers glimmered like captured stars, and guests whispered behind crystal glasses filled with champagne. It was the wedding of the summer grand, beautiful and secretive. None of them knew the truth. None of them knew that the bride and groom had met through a contract, not through love. Nguyen stood before a mirror in the bridal room, adjusting the simple linen gown she had chosen herself. No silk, no lace, nothing expensive, just clean lines and soft fabric that allowed her to breathe. Her reflection looked calm, but her hands betrayed her. They shook slightly as she reached for the bouquet of white hydrangeas she had arranged that morning. She had arranged thousands of bouquets for other brides, but this one felt heavier. A knock came on the door. Her assistant peeked in and said, "It is time." Leah nodded. Her chest tightened. Every step she took toward the ceremony felt like walking into a story that was not hers. Across the aisle, Adrian Wolfe waited in a tailored gray suit, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. The youngest heir of Wolfe estates, he had spent his entire life in the light of responsibility. He was known for his calm precision and his unwillingness to bend. But this summer, for the first time, he had compromised. When the board of directors demanded he marry before the end of the fiscal year to inherit his late father's foundation, Adrian made a choice that defied logic. He offered marriage to the one woman who had challenged him rather than obeyed him, Leah, the resort's event manager. He had seen her once, standing barefoot in the garden at dusk, replanting flowers that the landscapers had discarded. When he asked why she bothered, she said, "Because beauty deserves another chance." That answer stayed with him. It was not pity or sentiment, it was belief. Now, under the pale gold light of summer, she walked toward him with quiet dignity. Her eyes did not sparkle like the other brides he had seen at business galas. They carried something deeper resolve. The minister began to speak, his voice echoing gently through the glass hall. Guests leaned forward, phones lifted, recording what they thought was a love story. Leah's heart pounded as the words blurred together. Honor, cherish, forever. Each sounded like a lie. Adrian's gaze remained fixed on her face. When she hesitated to take his hand, he leaned slightly closer and whispered, "Just breathe. You are doing fine." The simplicity of that sentence disarmed her. For the first time since the contract, she felt seen, not as a solution but as a person. She took his hand. It was warm, steady, surprisingly gentle. They exchanged vows written by the company's legal department, words that meant nothing, but sounded like everything. When the minister said, "You may now kiss the bride," Adrian hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, with quiet grace, he brushed his lips against her forehead, not her mouth. It was a gesture of respect rather than possession, and somehow that made it harder for her to breathe. Applause filled the air. The guests cheered, cameras flashed. To everyone watching, it looked perfect, the cool, poised air and the graceful woman who had captured him. But beneath the applause, Leah felt the world tilt slightly, as if fate had shifted a degree off course. The limousine waited outside, its black surface gleaming under the late afternoon Sunday. As they stepped inside, the noise of the party faded. The silence between them felt alive. Adrian loosened his tie, exhaled slowly, and turned toward her. "You did well," he said softly. "Thank you for not trembling." "I was close," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He glanced at her, a faint curve appearing at the corner of his mouth. "Do not worry. It is only for one summer." Leah turned to the window. The ocean stretched endlessly, the horizon melting into gold. She wanted to believe him that this arrangement was temporary, that she could walk away unscathed when the season ended. But something inside her knew better. As the car rolled down the coastal road, she caught his reflection in the window. For a moment, the man beside her did not look like a billionaire or a strategist. He looked human, tired, haunted, almost lonely. Outside, the first stars began to pierce the fading sky. Leah rested her hand on her lap, feeling the cool band of gold that marked her as someone's wife, even if only for a season. And though the sea whispered softly against the shore, one phrase echoed louder than all the rest. "Trust me," he had said. It was supposed to be reassurance. Instead, it felt like a promise she did not yet understand. The first week of their marriage unfolded like a silent performance. Every morning, Leah woke to the sound of waves brushing against the rocks and the faint hum of the ceiling fan above the balcony. The staff treated her with polished politeness, but behind every good morning, Mrs. Wolfe, she sensed the weight of curiosity. They were waiting for her to make a mistake. Adrian was rarely home before sunset. He spent his days in meetings with investors and legal advisors, navigating the storm left behind by his father's death. When he returned, he was composed, distant, perfectly courteous. He always asked, "Did you eat?" And she always answered, "Yes." It became their evening ritual, a conversation so brief it could fit between two heartbeats. Yet, in the quiet hours, Leah found herself studying the man behind the contract. He never raised his voice. He never laughed too loud. He drank black coffee without sugar and worked with a precision that bordered on isolation. Sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, his hand lingered over the framed photograph of his father. There was grief there unspoken, unresolved. Leah had her own secret rhythm. Each morning, she arranged fresh flowers in the entry hall of the mansion. No one asked her to, but she could not stand the sterility of the marble and glass. She believed that a house, no matter how grand, should breathe. When Adrian passed through the hall one morning and saw the vases of wild daisies, he paused. "You did this?" he asked. "Yes, they were growing by the cliff," she replied. His gaze softened for the briefest second before he turned away. "They suit the place," he murmured. By the end of the second week, whispers began to circle. The press had caught a glimpse of them at the harbor, and speculation spread that their union was merely strategic. Adrian dismissed every inquiry, but Leah could feel the invisible cameras following her every step. She spent more time in the garden, hands buried in soil, grounding herself in something real. One afternoon, as thunder rolled in from the ocean, the power flickered out. Adrian found her on the veranda, lighting candles in tall glass jars. Rain started to fall, soft at first, then heavy. He took the candle from her hand and placed it on the railing. "You should come inside," he said. "I like the rain," she answered. "It reminds me that the world still moves, even when we stop." For the first time he smiled not politely, but genuinely. "That sounds like something my father would have said." They sat under the awning, watching the downpour blur the horizon. The air smelled of salt and wet stone. It was the first moment they had shared without roles, without pretense. Leah looked at him and saw not the billionaire heir, but a man quietly carrying the weight of legacy. "You miss him," she said softly. He did not deny it. "He built this place with hope. I am just trying not to destroy it." Lightning flashed, and for a heartbeat their faces were illuminated. In that fragile light, something shifted small but undeniable. When the storm passed, Adrian handed her his jacket. "Keep this," he said. "You look like you would rather freeze than ask for warmth." She laughed quietly, surprised by his gentleness. "You sound like you know me." "Cheeto." "Not yet," he replied. "But maybe I am starting to." That night, Leah placed his jacket over the arm of a chair, its scent still faintly of rain and cedar. She stood by the window, watching the ocean reclaim its calm. For the first time since the wedding, she did not feel like an intruder in her own life. Downstairs, Adrian sat alone in his study, staring at the signed contract that defined their arrangement. His pen hovered over it for a long time before he finally closed the folder. Somewhere beyond the door, he heard the soft sound of her laughter drifting through the hall light, unguarded, alive. It was the sound of something he had not heard in years. Trust. And it frightened him more than he cared to admit. By the third week of their arrangement, the house had begun to change in small, almost invisible ways. The cold edges of Seaview Estate were softening. The air that once smelled only of salt and marble polish now carried traces of jasmine and coffee. Leah's presence had a way of filling quiet spaces without noise. Every morning, she prepared a tray with breakfast and placed it outside Adrian's study. He rarely joined her, but he noticed. The first time he found a note beside his cup of black coffee, it read, "You should try it with honey once. It is less bitter." The next day, he found honey stirred in already. He did not mention it, yet he drank it all. When the weekend arrived, the resort hosted its annual charity gala, an event Adrian could not cancel. It was the first time they would appear together in public, as husband and wife. The entire coastal town buzzed with anticipation. Leah stood before her mirror, fastening a small pearl pin into her hair. She looked elegant, but unpretentious, more like herself than any of the women who would soon surround her. Adrian waited at the foot of the grand staircase. When he saw her descend, his breath caught, though he disguised it with a slight nod. "You look appropriate for the occasion," he said carefully. She smiled faintly. "Appropriate is all I was going for." At the gala, the orchestra played beneath strings of golden light. Reporters whispered, cameras flashed, and questions swirled like perfume. Leah stood beside Adrian, poised but tense. She could feel judgment everywhere in the glances of socialites, in the hush that followed her name. When one journalist asked bluntly, "Do you truly believe you belong in his world?" the room went silent. Leah's hands tightened around her glass. For a moment, Adrian thought she would walk away. Instead, she turned toward the reporter and said calmly, "Belonging is not given, it is earned. I am learning my place every day." The crowd stirred, uncertain whether to applaud or criticize. Adrian looked at her, his jaw tightening with something like pride. "You handled that better than I would have," he murmured. Later that evening, during a slow song, he offered his hand. "We should dance at least once. It is expected." She hesitated. "I am not sure I remember how." "Then follow me," he said. They moved together under the soft amber lights, two silhouettes among whispers and cameras. For the first time, Adrian's hand rested on her waist, not for the sake of appearance, but because it felt natural. The music swelled, and for a fleeting moment, the world around them dissolved into rhythm and breath. When the song ended, the applause returned. Reporters snapped more photos, but the looks on their faces had changed. There was curiosity now, even admiration. The cold air and the quiet woman no one understood, suddenly they looked real. After the gala, they drove home in silence. The ocean shimmered beyond the windows, silver beneath the moon. Leah turned to him and said, "You were different tonight." "So were you," he replied. "Was that part of the act?" "I am not sure anymore," he said, his voice barely above the hum of the engine. Back at the mansion, she carried her shoes in her hand, her feet aching, her heart unsettled. She caught her reflection in the glass door pearls, flowers, gold light, and almost laughed. "It looks real," she whispered to herself. From the hallway, Adrian's voice answered, "Maybe that is how real things begin." Leah froze for a moment, then smiled without turning around. Somewhere deep inside, a wall she had built for years began to crack. She walked to the balcony and let the sea breeze brush her face. The night smelled of champagne and the faint sweetness of honey. Below her, waves broke softly against the rocks, steady and certain, as if the ocean itself was reminding her that even false beginnings can lead somewhere true. The following week brought a different rhythm to Seaview Estate. The media storm that followed the gala faded, leaving behind an uneasy calm. For the first time, Adrian no longer rushed to leave the house each morning. He stayed a little longer at breakfast, reading reports while Leah arranged flowers on the veranda. They spoke in short exchanges that slowly grew into conversations. One morning, as she set down a vase filled with wild irises, he looked up from his laptop. "You always choose flowers that look like they belong outside," he said. She smiled. "Maybe I prefer things that are free." He nodded thoughtfully. "Freedom is expensive." "Not always," she replied. "Sometimes it just requires honesty." That answer lingered in his mind for the rest of the day. Later that afternoon, Leah visited the staff quarters where a few housekeepers were preparing to leave. The company planned to downsize, and several employees feared losing their jobs. Leah organized a small workshop on flower arranging, teaching them how to craft centerpieces that the resort could sell. She wanted them to have another skill, something to fall back on. Adrian discovered her in the courtyard surrounded by buckets of flowers and laughter. The women looked lighter, more hopeful than he had ever seen them. He stood at the edge for a moment, unnoticed, watching the way Leah's presence changed the air around her. When she finally turned and saw him, she brushed her hands on her apron and smiled. "Do you need something, Mr. Wolfe?" He shook his head. "No, I think I already found it." That evening they had dinner together for the first time without guests or staff. The meal was simple grilled fish, salad, and bread. They sat on the balcony overlooking the sea. For a long time, they ate in silence, the only sound, the distant surf. Adrian broke the quiet. "You know, the board never approved of this arrangement. They think I married you to provoke them." "Did you?" she asked. "At first, maybe. But now I am not sure who is provoking whom." She laughed softly, setting down her glass. "You are not as difficult as people say. Do not ruin my reputation, he said, but his voice carried warmth. When the night air turned cool, Leah rose to collect the plates. Adrian stopped her. Leave them. The staff can take care of it tomorrow. I do not mind. I know. That is what worries me. He looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to memorize the shape of her patience. You fix everything that is broken, even things that are not yours to repair. She met his gaze calmly. Maybe that is what life is, fixing what others stop believing in. Something in that answer unsettled him. He turned away, but his voice was softer than before. You remind me too much of my father. Was that a compliment? It was, he said, almost to himself. That night, Leah could not sleep. She walked barefoot to the garden, where the moonlight washed the lavender fields in silver. Adrian found her there an hour later, sitting on the edge of the fountain, her hair loose around her shoulders. I thought you were asleep, he said. I could not. The night feels too alive. RJ. He joined her quietly. For a while they said nothing. The sound of water and the faint hum of the sea filled the silence. Then, without looking at her, he said, I never thanked you for what you are doing for the staff. You do not need to. Yes, I do. You reminded me that this place was meant for people, not profit. When she looked at him, his eyes reflected the moonlight, no longer cold but searching. She whispered, Maybe that is what your father wanted you to remember. Tamo. He nodded slowly. Maybe it is? For the first time since the contract began, the distance between them did not feel like protection. It felt like a bridge, and neither of them wanted to look away. Summer deepened along the coast, and Seaview Estate seemed to breathe again. The tourists returned, the gardens bloomed, and the scent of lavender followed every breeze. Leah's workshops became a quiet success among the staff. What began as small afternoon lessons grew into weekend gatherings where laughter and music filled the courtyard. Adrian watched from a distance, quietly astonished by how easily she transformed the estate into something human again. By late July, the Wolfe Foundation prepared for its annual charity auction, an event held in memory of Adrian's father. It would be the first public appearance for the new Mrs. Wolfe since the gala. The pressure was heavy. Adrian's advisors reminded him that the wrong headline could destroy months of progress. He nodded through every meeting, but his thoughts lingered elsewhere, on the way Leah hummed while arranging flowers, on the way she looked at the sea, as if searching for something only she could see. On the morning of the event, Leah found Adrian standing on the balcony, dressed in a navy suit. The ocean light framed him like a painting. He turned when he heard her footsteps. She wore a pale blue gown that brushed the floor, simple yet striking. He studied her for a moment too long. You should not look so surprised, she said gently. I was trying to remember if I have ever seen you nervous, he replied. I am not nervous, she said. I am terrified. He smiled faintly. That makes two of us. The charity event was held outdoors, under a canopy of white sails. Guests arrived in designer clothes, cameras flashed, and the soft murmur of polite conversation filled the air. Leah stayed close to Adrian, following the rhythm of the evening. Everything felt controlled until a voice cut through the crowd. A journalist asked loudly, Mrs. Wolfe, many believe this marriage is a contract. Would you care to comment? The music faltered. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. Adrian opened his mouth to respond, but Leah lifted a hand slightly, stopping him. She looked at the journalist with calm composure. If believing in kindness feels contractual to you, then maybe that says more about the world than about us. The silence that followed was long enough for the waves to be heard against the shore. Then, unexpectedly, applause began soft, uncertain at first, then stronger. Adrian glanced at her, something unguarded flickering across his face. When the speeches were over and the guests began to drift toward the dance floor, Leah slipped away to the garden for air. The night was warm, stars hanging low over the water. She leaned against the railing, letting her heart beat slow. Adrian found her there, hands resting on the wooden rail, her hair moving in the wind. He stopped a few feet away. You handled that well, he said quietly. I just told the truth, she replied. That was not the truth, he said. You protected me. Lol. She turned to face him. You do not need my protection, Adrian. Apparently I do. You are the only one who has managed to make them see me as human again. Their eyes met, steady and unflinching. The distance between them felt fragile, as if a single breath could close it. He took one small step forward. Tell me something, he said. When this summer ends, will you miss any of it? I will miss the sea, she said. Just the sea? And the silence, she added. He nodded once, as if that answer hurt and healed him at the same time. Then, with deliberate care, he reached for her hand. There are things I cannot say right now, he said softly. But when the time comes, I want you to believe me. The wind lifted her hair, carrying the scent of salt and rain. She looked at him and whispered, "That sounds dangerously close to trust." He smiled, then quiet, real, and warmer than she had ever seen. Maybe that is exactly what it is. Tal. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sea kept moving, endless and sure, while somewhere far off, thunder rumbled on the horizon. It was the kind of night that promised change, the kind that no contract could define. The morning after the charity auction, the house felt unusually still. The staff moved quietly through the halls, aware that something between Adrian and Leah had shifted. No one could name it, but it hung in the air like the scent of rain before a storm. Adrian spent most of the day in his office, reviewing financial reports that refused to hold his attention. He kept replaying the image of Leah standing under the lights, her calm voice disarming the crowd. She had turned what could have been a scandal into admiration. For the first time in years, he realized he was not fighting alone. That evening, Leah found him on the veranda, staring at the ocean. The sun was setting, spilling orange light across the horizon. "You missed dinner," she said softly. "I was not hungry," he replied. She placed a small plate beside him anyway. "You should eat. You cannot win a war on an empty stomach." He smiled faintly. "You think this is a war?" "I think you have been fighting ghosts for too long," she said. "Maybe it is time to make peace with them." He looked at her for a long moment. "You sound like you have done that yourself." "Every day," she answered. "I just do it with flowers instead of numbers." Amar. The conversation might have ended there, but she noticed a stack of documents on the table beside him. They were legal papers bearing the Wolfe Foundation seal. She frowned. "Are those from the board?" He nodded. "They want to dissolve the foundation and merge it with a corporate trust. It would make them richer, but it would destroy everything my father built." Leah's voice hardened with quiet conviction. "Then do not let them." "It is not that simple," he said. "They hold most of the votes. Then find another way. You always do." Her certainty unsettled him more than the threat itself. It reminded him how easily she believed in him, something he had forgotten people could do. The next morning, the press released a new article hinting that Leah's perfect performance at the gala was part of a calculated rebranding effort. The story spread fast. By noon, cameras appeared at the gates of Seaview Estate. Leah stood at the window, watching reporters gather near the drive. "They're not going to stop, are they?" she asked. "No," Adrian said. "They never do." "Then what happens now?" He closed the curtain. "We hold our ground." Hours later, a storm rolled in from the sea. Thunder shook the windows as rain swept over the estate. Power flickered once, then failed completely. In the dark, Leah searched for candles while Adrian checked the generator. When he returned, he found her kneeling on the floor, shielding a flame from the wind that slipped through the open terrace door. "You should not be near the door," he said. She looked up, her face lit by the candle's soft glow. "You should not worry so much." For a moment, he simply watched her. The candlelight softened every line of her face, turning her into something almost unreal. He crossed the room slowly and knelt beside her. "I am sorry," he said. "For what?" "For letting them turn this into something ugly." "It is not ugly," she said. "It is human." The wind roared again, and the flame between them flickered dangerously. Adrian cupped his hand around it, steadying the light. Their fingers brushed, and time seemed to pause. "Trust me," he whispered. She did not pull away. "I already am," she answered quietly. The storm raged outside, but inside, the air held a fragile stillness. For the first time, the distance between them was gone. When morning came, the world felt new. The storm had washed the estate clean, leaving behind the sharp scent of wet lavender. Leah walked barefoot across the veranda, her hair still damp. Adrian watched her from the doorway. "Are you thinking of leaving?" he asked. She turned, surprised. "Why would you ask that?" "Because if I were you," he said, "I might want to run from all this." She smiled gently. "Maybe before, but not anymore." Tamda. He did not move closer, but his expression softened. "Then maybe summer is not ending yet." Leah looked at him, sunlight warming her face, and for the first time, she believed that it might be true. The calm that followed the storm did not last long. Within a few days, the tabloids released something far worse than gossip. A leaked email surfaced, supposedly proving that Leah had been paid to marry Adrian as part of a business arrangement. Screenshots spread online, twisting facts into a scandal. The story exploded across every major outlet, and once again the gates of Seaview Estate were crowded with reporters. Inside the house, the tension was sharp enough to cut through the air. Leah sat in the study, reading the headlines on Adrian's tablet. Her hands trembled, not from guilt, but from the sting of betrayal. "Where did they even get this?" she asked quietly. "From someone inside the company," Adrian said. "A board member, most likely." "So this was deliberate?" "Yes," he replied. "They want me to withdraw from the foundation meeting tomorrow. If they destroy your name, they destroy mine." Leah looked up, her expression steady despite the chaos. "Then, you cannot hide. You have to face them. They will eat you alive out there," he warned. "Let them try," she said. "I am done letting other people write my story." Logang. That evening, she packed a small bag and left the estate, ignoring the flashes of cameras and shouted questions. Adrian watched her go from the balcony, his heart heavy with something he could not name. He wanted to stop her, to protect her, but he knew that whatever she planned to do, it was her choice to make. The next morning, the boardroom of Wolfe Holdings was filled with tension. Executives whispered, lawyers shuffled papers, and the chairman cleared his throat. Just as the meeting began, the doors opened. Leah entered in a simple cream dress, holding a folder against her chest. Every head turned. Adrian stood immediately, but she raised her hand slightly to stop him. "I know I do not belong here," she said, her voice clear and steady. "But I also know that lies lose their power when you stop being afraid of them." One of the executives laughed. "You expect us to believe you married him for love?" She looked directly at him. "No, I married him for a reason, but love found its way in anyway." A ripple of silence crossed the room. She placed the folder on the table. "These are the community project records from the past month. The staff workshops, the fundraising, the letters from families who were helped by this foundation. You wanted proof that this marriage was not real? Look around. Every one of those people believes in what this place stands for. If that is not real, then nothing here is." Number. Adrian watched her, awe replacing anger. When the board tried to interrupt, he stepped forward. "Enough," he said. "You can threaten me all you want, but you will not touch her. This foundation stays, with or without your signatures." The chairman leaned back, studying him. "You are risking everything." Adrian nodded. "I already know what everything feels like. It is not worth much if you have to lose your integrity to keep it." Sir. After the meeting, Leah walked out into the hallway, her knees weak but her heart steady. Adrian followed, his footsteps echoing. "You should not have done that alone," he said. She turned to face him. "You said once that freedom is expensive. I just paid my share." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of what they had faced settled between them, heavier than any storm. Then Adrian reached out and took her hand. "You were right," he said softly. "It was never about business." Laugh. "Then what was it about?" she asked. He looked at her with quiet certainty. It was about finding someone who still believed in what could be saved. Outside, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds. Reporters waited for a statement, but none came. Adrian and Leah walked past them in silence, their fingers still intertwined. That night, the headlines began to change. The photos of them leaving the building hand in hand spread across social media, tagged not with scandal, but with something unexpected respect. The world, for once, seemed to understand what neither of them had been able to say out loud. Sometimes, truth does not need to shout. It just needs someone brave enough to stand in the light. The following days unfolded in a blur of news coverage and speculation, but something fundamental had changed. For the first time, the headlines were not written by the people who wished to destroy them. The photographs from the board meeting told a different story: the proud woman who stood for what was right, and the man who stood beside her, not above her. The public saw them not as a scandal, but as two people refusing to bow to corruption. Inside Seaview Estate, the atmosphere shifted. The staff greeted Leah not as a guest, but as someone who belonged. They had watched her fight for the foundation and for every job it supported. When she walked through the halls, the quiet nods she received carried genuine respect. Adrian spent the following week rebuilding the foundation's operations. The board had fractured, and several members resigned after the confrontation. The remaining ones reached out with new proposals, softer and more respectful. Still, the work was exhausting. Leah often found him in his study long after midnight, surrounded by paperwork and untouched coffee. One night, she walked in and placed a cup of tea beside him. "It is past midnight again," she said. He rubbed his temples. "I will be done soon." "You said that yesterday," she replied. He leaned back in his chair, studying her in the dim light. "You never give up on anyone, do you?" "Only on people who stop trying," she said. He smiled faintly. You remind me that good things still exist. Leja. They always did, she answered. People just forget to look for them. Outside, the night was still and warm. The ocean breathed softly against the shore, and somewhere in the distance the lighthouse beam swept across the water. Adrian stood and walked to the window. I used to think this view was mine, he said. Now I realize I was only borrowing it. From whom? She asked. From everyone who believed in what this place could be. He turned back to her. Including you. Leah hesitated, her voice gentle. You did not need me to remind you. You just needed someone to listen. He stepped closer. You have done more than listen. The air between them shifted again, full of things neither dared to name. He reached for her hand, then stopped himself. I want to show you something tomorrow, he said instead. The next morning, Adrian drove her to a plot of land overlooking the ocean, just beyond the estate's border. The soil was rough, dotted with wild flowers and patches of grass. What is this place? She asked. This was supposed to become another resort, he explained. But I changed my mind. The board approved the donation last night. It will be the new site for the Summer Garden Center. Laya's breath caught. You mean the studio, the one I told you about? Yes, he said. You wanted a place where people could learn, where they could rebuild their lives. I want that too. Kano. She looked around, the wind tugging at her hair. You did this for me? He shook his head. No, for what you stand for. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The waves crashed below, steady and strong. Leah felt her throat tighten. I do not know what to say. Then do not, he said. Just help me build it. When she turned toward him, his expression held something unguarded hope, the kind that came from surrender rather than control. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You once said that beauty deserves another chance, he whispered. You were right. The wind carried the words away, but she felt them settle deep inside. It was not a confession, not yet. It was a promise. That evening, back at the estate, Leah stood in the garden, surrounded by the soft light of lanterns. The sea shimmered beyond the cliffs. She finally understood that their story had outgrown its beginning. It was no longer about a contract or a season. It was about two people learning to rebuild the same way the sea rebuilt the shore after every storm, slowly, quietly, and with grace. And somewhere in the distance, Adrian's voice echoed softly through the warm summer night. Trust me, he said, the hardest part is over. Summer came to its final days, the air softer, the sunsets deeper. Seaview Estate glowed under the golden light, and the once scandalous marriage that began with a contract had quietly become a story of redemption. The world had stopped asking if they were real. It no longer mattered. The new Summer Garden Center opened on a calm afternoon in late August. The event was simple, without reporters or speeches, only laughter and the hum of music carried on the sea breeze. Rows of wildflowers lined the pathway leading to the new glass pavilion that overlooked the ocean. Former employees, families, and volunteers gathered to celebrate. Leah moved among them, greeting each person by name. When she looked up, she saw Adrian standing at the edge of the crowd, speaking with an elderly gardener who had once worked for his father. He was not the distant heir the world had known. He looked open, grounded, almost peaceful. When their eyes met, he crossed the distance between them. It is everything you imagined, he said quietly. It is everything you helped me build, she replied. For a moment they simply stood together, watching the people they had both fought for. The sound of children laughing mixed with the rush of the tide below. Leah exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of all the months that had led to this. It feels strange, she said, to have something end without losing it. Adrian smiled. Maybe it is not ending. Later that evening, when the last guests left and the sky turned violet, he led her down to the shore. The tide was low, the sand cool under their feet. The sea shimmered like molten glass under the moonlight. Leah slipped off her shoes and let the water touch her toes. You once said beauty deserves another chance, Adrian said. I never forgot that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small gold band she had returned months ago. You gave this back once, but I think it was waiting for its real meaning. She looked at the ring resting in his palm, worn smooth by time and intention. You are serious, she whispered. He nodded. No contracts, no timelines, only choice. The ocean breeze lifted her hair as she met his eyes. I trusted you once, she said softly, and I was afraid. Trust me again, he answered. This time, there was nothing to fear. He slid the ring onto her finger. The fit was perfect, as if it had been meant for that moment all along. The world around them seemed to fall silent, even the waves holding their breath. Leah felt tears gather at the corner of her eyes, not from sadness, but from the quiet certainty that this was real. They stood together, framed by the sea and the endless horizon. For the first time since their story began, there were no spectators, no contracts, no questions, only two people who had chosen each other freely. Leah leaned her head against his shoulder. "So what happens now?" she asked. Adrian's voice was low, steady, and warm. "Now we build a life that does not need to be defended." The tide crept higher, wrapping around their ankles like a benediction. The stars brightened, one by one, across the darkening sky. In the distance, the waves whispered the same words that had once begun everything: "Trust me." And this time, when Leah whispered back, her answer was simple and sure: "I already do."